In the era of interconnectedness, you would think that humanity would be growing more tolerant. However, it seems that our society cannot shake the irrational fear of the other, an enemy that's been constructed by the powers that be to perpetuate endless war and the erosion of civil liberties. In fact, the latest Pew Research poll on attitudes toward Muslims shows that 40% of Americans believe Islam is a religion of violence. Well, earlier I spoke to someone with a unique perspective on the matter. Sean Stone, son of director Oliver Stone, who is of Jewish descent, was raised Christian, yet also recently embraced the Islamic faith. And this is how the corporate media reacted when he did.
27-year-old Sean Stone, son of controversial director Oliver Stone, converted to Islam in Iran on Valentine's Day.
He became a Muslim on Valentine's Day in Iran while working on a documentary there. The trip has given Sean an interesting perspective on Iran, its people, politics, and even its president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
It seems very perverse that you would wish to spend much time with this guy, given your family upbringing.
But while the media has been fixated on Stone as a Muslim, he's also a burgeoning actor and filmmaker who recently directed and starred in the film Greystone Park. And now he's co-hosting an online talk show called Buzzsaw. I first asked Sean about what first made him embrace Islam, and here's what he had to say.
I'm part Jewish. My dad's side is half Jewish, but frankly, my father is a Buddhist and doesn't feel, any real attachment to the Jewish faith. I was raised with a mixture in a sense because I was baptized Christian. I studied the Old Testament and New Testament as a kid, especially in school. And then, post 9/11, I became curious about Islam because I wanted to see the other side's point of view. Frankly, from the Western side, it seemed that Islam was a fanatical religion, and yet I never judge a book by the cover. I want to actually read the Quran and understand it. And in the course of then journeying to places like the West Bank with my father in 2002, and then traveling to Somalia by myself, all these these trips ultimately leading to Iran in 2011, all these trips really opened my eyes to the Islamic world, and I saw Islam as a continuation of the Judeo-Christian tradition. I see it, very much for the Prophet Muhammad as the last prophet in that lineage. And the Quran is a very sensible book. If you read it, frankly, it makes a whole lot of sense regarding their interpretation of Jesus, whom they look as a prophet, and obviously the Abrahamic lineage from Abraham to Moses are all very much respected in the Quran. So
and of course, any book can really be misinterpreted, interpreted in different ways. Obviously, your experiences worldwide force you to see these myths firsthand and have them deconstructed right in front of you. As someone who's very well versed in a lot of different religions, what's your response to those who argue that a clash of civilizations is inevitable between the East and the West?
Yeah, I mean, we saw that very much in the 90s. I remember the literature and Sam Huntington take on Clash of Civilizations, and frankly, people have to remember the history that Bernard Lewis and Huntington came out of an ideology of the 70s, which came through the Carter White House, through Brzezinski in particular. Remember his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, actively sought the war with the Soviet Union through inciting them to invade Afghanistan. And Brzezinski admitted as much, saying that we provoked the Soviets into an invasion of Afghanistan. We basically created their Vietnam, because their Afghan war lasted, 8-9 years. It was a horrible defeat for them. And so their policy from the 70s was, let's create a clash of civilizations along this fault line of Islam against the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union at the time included all these Muslim states, and you see it to this day in the Chechen War, for example. So the idea of Clash of Civilizations was a war that they created against the Soviets to break up the Soviet Empire, and ultimately, some people would say it backfired and led to the invasion, led to the attacks against America. But ultimately, I look at it as very much a British imperial strategy of creating dissent in the Islamic world between Shia and Sunni, for example, that most Americans don't understand. Mm-hmm. If you go to the Middle East, you understand it much better, how the war in Iraq and Syria is creating and fomenting this violence old ideologies, very much like the Protestants and Catholics fighting, in Ireland. That's an American, but frankly, it's a British imperial strategy that the Americans adopted in the 70s and carries through to this day. So I don't believe it at all, because I see that all these people from across the world live together harmoniously. They have historically, and yet we have an imperial strategy that's actually trying to incite this violence.
It seems like a childlike kind of fantasy that, it's inherently, these people are inherently backwards and de-evolved, and so of course we're going to come to a head. It really does serve the interest of the establishment pretty well in terms of perpetuating that imperialism. To what extent is the corporate media complicit in this perpetuation of the narrative of Islamophobia, and what agenda do they serve, Sean?
I mean, this is obviously a major question of what we're dealing with as a human species at this time. I try to put an end to this clash of civilizations dialogue by accepting Islam publicly and saying, within myself, I'm Jewish, Christian, Muslim. There are millions of people around the world who can understand that and agree with that. The problem is, of course, the media controls what we see. Towards that end, I put together a show with Tyrell Ventura, who's Jesse Ventura's son, called Buzzsaw, which we do online. It's an alternative media source that's a little bit like, Alex Jones or RT, in the sense that it's not conventional. We take the articles and the stories that the major news media are not publishing, and they're not, pushing, because, as we know, the media is controlled. It's a conglomerate system, and it's very easy to really dissect it and look at who are the major corporations, and it really boils down to less than 10 that own all the major news media, and the media is obviously tied together between the TV networks and the film studios, and then you go towards broadcasting of all kinds, and it just becomes it is a conspiracy, and it's a conspiracy of omitting the facts that don't fit the narrative that they want to construct. And so I think that the beauty of the internet is that people are able to then see alternative points of view. They're able to see, they're able to become more and more aware, and I think that's why the major news media actually is facing this. Ultimately, they're going to face a great awakening of people, and that's why they want to create as much chaos and destruction and fear as possible now.
Absolutely. They want to they need to be pushed out into irrelevancy, and it is a conspiracy in plain sight, Sean. I mean, we have 6 media corporations, conglomerates, and there's about 120 boards of directors sitting on those corporate conglomerates that also sit on the boards of directors for these defense contractors, Monsanto, et cetera. So it really is hidden in plain sight for those who seek the information. It's in order to construct an enemy, though, of course, like every era of just endless war, it's no surprise how much Islamophobia that we're seeing across the corporate media today. You mentioned Hollywood. What about Hollywood with shows like Homeland, movies like Zero Dark 30? I mean, would you say that Hollywood's also doing the bidding of the establishment?
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that the reality is we live in a world of fear. And most people are motivated by fear, and it's become more and more apparent, even though I would say more people are waking up. And the truth about the internet and the alternative media sources is that it's not only that people are waking up, but that we're becoming more aware of those who are awakened, and we can create more networks between those who are aware. And at the end of the day, all these millions of people who are aware of the conspiracies, who are aware that 9/11 was probably an inside job of some kind, that it was not simply a ragtag group of terrorists led by bin Laden who conducted this operation, and now led to over a decade of constant fear-mongering and aggression. And yet, despite the fact that there's more awareness on it, why is it that we do continue to see this propaganda about the boogeyman terrorists, whether they be Muslim or Russian or North Korean or whatnot? What is that system? It's a cycle of fear. It's a cycle that has to be broken internally, and it's very difficult to deal with, because at the end of the day, money is obviously driving these operations, whether it be Hollywood or media. And so long as the money is saying, don't take the risk, don't make the film that can be critical of U.S. policy, then of course that will become the status. That will be the status quo until someone is risky enough and happens to be able to break it. And as soon as it gets broken, then that becomes the trend. But right now, we are still living in that quarantine, in a sense. The
threat of terrorism is still less than slipping in the bathtub and falling. I mean, furniture falling on you from an apartment complex. I mean, it's basically nil. So it's totally erroneous to even have this endless war, erosion of civil liberties. But I wanted to move on to Palestine. You've been very outspoken about the issue. Your father, Oliver Stone, has been very outspoken about the Israeli lobby, saying that it not only controls foreign policy, but an aspect of Hollywood as well. What are your thoughts on Israel's sphere of influence?
There's a lot of conflict internally, and there always has been, frankly, in Israel. There's always been a large conflict between the European settlers and, coming from different parts of Europe, not feeling comfortable in this, in what is historically Palestine. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of internal issues, and that's why, it's ironic that Netanyahu is actually an American guy who's now the Prime Minister of Israel, just to show you that the reason why a lot of Middle Easterners object to Israel's existence is that historically they look at it as a crusader state, a crusader kingdom, because it's the exact same location that the Europeans established their crusader kingdom 1,000 years ago. And so when they see all these European, Russian Jews, coming into Israel, they're saying, look at these European settlers. They're not Jews from from this region. That they have no ties to the land. They're coming here to settle, and that's the Middle Eastern point of view as far as why they object to it. Now, I'm not a proponent of attacking Israel or trying to dissolve it at this point, but I'm simply saying that is why there's so much antagonism to Israel, is that they look at it historically as a continuation of this European encroachment upon the Middle East.
Yeah, and we always hear the other side, and that's why it's important to even discuss what the other perspective is, because we literally do not hear that ever in the U.S., Sean. And I always thought it was so interesting that the U.S. is so focused on Iran's nuclear development and saying that it would create a nuclear arms race in the region. Meanwhile, Israel's had nuclear weapons for years. So, I mean, isn't the arms race already created? I wanted to just sum this up. As someone who has spent a lot of time in Iran, what would you say the biggest misconception is about the country, given the incessant propaganda about them being America's biggest enemy?
I think frankly, I mean, I was always surprised by people asking me if I was scared when I went there, because there was no sense of, there's no terrorism that occurs, within Iran or against, it's a very stable country. Whether or not, Hezbollah, whom they support in Lebanon, is a terrorist or not, that's debatable, because as they operate within the Lebanese borders, I don't consider them to be terrorists. I see them as defenders of Lebanese sovereignty, because Lebanon has been invaded numerous times by Israel. So Iran as a terrorist sponsor, I think, is a great exaggeration. And frankly, it's the whole concept of terrorism is quite insane at this point, where we have drones and missiles being launched and killing hundreds of thousands of people in that region, and across the Middle East, across North Africa, since this war on terror has occurred. How many thousands of families and civilians and children have been killed in the process? And yet, because we kill them with our missiles, we don't consider ourselves terrorists. We only consider those who blow themselves up terrorists. And obviously, you cannot create that qualification. That's a 1984 Orwellian doublespeak term. So the idea of Iran as this great terrorist enemy is not true. They're very civilized people. They have a 3,000-year history. They are not looking to destroy themselves in the process of a war against against Israel, unless there is a good motivation to do so. So whatever becomes of this conflict against Iran, I think we have to realize that their strategy is their long-term interest is to continue the Persian state, which, as I said, is 3,000 years old, one of the oldest states in the world, aside from China, for example,
right.
Maybe India. It's like there's nothing older, so why would they seek to destroy themselves with some kind of fanatical war against Israel? It just makes no sense.
Well, it's really clear to see who the aggressor is when you look at the timeline of aggression, U.S. versus Iran. And one man's freedom fighters, another man's terrorists, Sean. To wrap it up really quickly, tell people where you can see your new show online and check out more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Our show Buzzsaw airs, it goes on YouTube, but you can check us out on thelip.tv. That's the studio and company that sponsors and shows our stuff. So Buzzsaw is the name of the show. Myself, Tyrell Ventura, Tabitha Wallace. We're trying to get some alternative media out there, and what RT is doing is a great job, and we need more of it.
Thank you so much. Sean Stone, actor, writer, director, awesome to talk to you.
Thank you so much.